So, I feel like one of the most generally accepted points when it comes to Sanji is the fact that he is technically a failed Germa soldier. We found out on what feels like many years ago that the Vinsmokes have exoskeletons, or outer skeletons, which is technically just bones which are stronger than beyond human. Now quite frankly, they are humans who have been biologically modified through genetic enhancements in order to have enhanced physical traits. Now just to give you all some background on the Vinsmoke children, they're what we'd call modified humans, whose lineage factor has been manipulated, and this was done by their father, Vinsmoke Judge, when they were literally just embryos. And I don't want to go into the complete details of how the blueprint of life is manipulated, but this definitely links into a wider conversation on lineage factor. But effectively what Judge did was engineer his kids to possess superhuman traits, which was of course against the wishes of his wife, Vinsmoke Sora. And by making these modifications, Judge ensured his kids would develop a secondary hardened skeleton known as an exoskeleton. So what's this video about? Well, quite frankly, anyone who has read One Piece manga chapter 1028 would have realized that Sanji is awakening his latent power. And the reason I say awakening is because I predict that there's so much more to come. And that's what we're going to cover in this video. And to do this, let's take a look at Sanji's siblings and their raid suits, and of course the powers they possess. So if we look at them individually, they're literally all going to give us a clue as to what we can expect from Sanji. But to start off, I want to take a look at Yonji, because personally I think he's the weakest German sibling, but also because Sanji has shown us the beginning stages of the similar power, which is the exoskeleton. So I want to cast our minds back to One Piece, I think it was episode 79, I'm tempted to say 792 or 793, where Sanji and Yonji literally had their duel, and it was inside that Germa kingdom. And Sanji had literally kicked Yonji's face in, and this was where Yonji thought he could beat up Sanji because he was refusing to marry still at that point, but Sanji actually got the better of him. But what I really want to talk about is, in that castle we see one of the scientists with a hammer, and he was effectively trying to hammer Yonji's face back into shape. And we found out that even the hammer wasn't enough to correct this. So the scientist uses some ridiculous machine in order to correct his face, and of course it does work. Now the reason why I use this as my first example is of course because I believe that this is the exoskeleton which is now awakening within Sanji's body. But Sanji is technically one or many steps better, because we actually saw Sanji's body regenerating on its own. And honestly that just throws a load of spanners in the work, because this is something we haven't seen from any of the other Vinsmoke children. And the closest thing we have seen to this is this example by Yonji. But let's look at Yonji a little further, because just like the other German kids, they all have some sort of affinity to some sort of ability. And for Yonji, I believe it to be super strength, or a compressed air ability. I haven't double checked that, so apologies. But he can also extend and reach in his grip, which is really weird, but I'm just going to put that down to some sort of other scientific explanation. I want to pause here and look at the other siblings before explaining what's next for Sanji. So please do bear with me as we look at the next Germa sibling, and that is Reiju. And in terms of the siblings, I think she is closest to Sanji, and I literally mean that in two ways, both in relationship and genetically, because Reiju still does have her emotions as she loves Sanji as a younger brother. But the reason I think Reiju is so important is because she also has an affinity to poison, as we saw when Luffy was poisoned from that fish which he shouldn't have eaten. And I think it's even more interesting that her raid suit reacted to that ability when she was healing Luffy. And that's something to remember when we discuss Sanji and his fire ability. The next Germa sibling that I want to take a look at is of course Ichiji. And he's a little bit less interesting, but he's the oldest Germa kid, so we've got to take a look at him regardless. And the first thing to note is that he too did show us his outer skeleton, because in manga chapter 833, I believe Sanji went to punch his nose or something like that, and the impact actually did hurt his fist. And apologies for not researching this in advance as well, but feel free to fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong, because maybe it was a metallic nose or something like that. Now in regards to his power, Eiichiro is called Sparkling Red, and he can create these little explosions or light energy blasts from his hands, which are of course very powerful. And this was shown as it could break Perospero's candy wall. And lastly, before I get to Sanji, I want to take a look at Neji too. And the reason I've saved him until now is because I feel like he's a good base case in regards to the comparisons to Sanji. Because we've seen Neji use his powers without his raid suit on. And I mean, we literally saw him use an electro attack when he needs Sanji in the clone lab. However, with his raid suit on, we do however see that ability amplified, because he did use his raid suit in order to power up that sword as well. Which leads me to what I could expect from Sanji. You see, all along we couldn't make sense of where Sanji's firepower was coming from. Us in the community have theorized on Sanji using friction in the past, but now it's all coming full circle. And this really started when Queen made the comment on Sanji not being a Lunarian like King. And for me personally, this got me thinking, what if it was all in front of us from the beginning? Judge clearly has incorporated butterfly DNA within Reiju, and I'm no biologist, but Google's my best friend right here, because some butterflies and caterpillars do suck out poison and keep it in their body in order to protect themselves. And I mean, Reiju is literally called Poison Pink. Or how about Neji, who we've seen use Electro? Now surely nobody needs this highlighting, but isn't this an ability that looks very much like what the minks can use? What if Judge incorporated some mink DNA into Neji? And look, effectively what I'm getting at here is the evidence that this is all pointing to. I'm sure if we really think about it, we could theorize where Yonji and Eiichiro got their powers from too. But Sanji is the focus here, and as I mentioned, he's had this fire ability for as long as we can remember, and with all the evidence pointing to him having some Lunarian DNA in him, it's only a matter of time until we see his true ability. And that brings me to my next point, which is the raid suits. As mentioned, the raid suits seem to enhance the abilities of the Germa kids, and it's definitely to do with the technology. We know that they're locked to their shape, DNA, and so on. But I mean, the Germa kids were literally useless at the wedding without their suits, and as soon as they got them on, it was go time. And we know Sanji's powers didn't start kicking in until the second time he wore the raid suit. And so far we've only seen this exoskeleton ability being used now. Surely the raid suit has brought out this ability, just like it enhances the abilities of the others. So what's to happen to Sanji if he wears the raid suit more and more? Does it draw out all of the latent power he has? And what do we expect if he truly does have the DNA of a Lunarian in him? I definitely think it's going to be even more fascinating to watch the King and Zoro fight, because technically Sanji should be able to have some similar abilities to King. Now will Sanji be able to just burst into flames just like the Lunarians? I mean, what more can he do? There is a lot of questions that I have, because there's so much to delve into, and if I'm honest, this is just because of the raid suits. Because we know the raid suits have many properties, and just to name a few, they're fire resistant, give you extra durability, make you bulletproof, but also give Germa the extra speed and ability to fly. But if we look at Sanji, a few things are apparent, and these are the fact that he's probably already fire resistant because he can already almost burst into flames, and there's also the fact that he can fly already because he can moonwalk. But if we look on the flip side and we look at Sanji's weaknesses, durability is probably the key weakness. I mean, we can just look at his fight against Virgo. But if I'm honest, it's his clash against Dofi which is the ultimate tease. Because when the anime gave us the animation of his shin cracking, us Sanji fans were down bad. But now Oda has negated that all we're seeing Sanji not only awaken his exoskeleton, but have regenerative abilities too. Now just imagine what he can do with all of these abilities when he finally puts his raid suit on. He already has terrific feats, but how much more could he do with his flame ability? We've seen with the siblings that it enhances their abilities, and it only makes sense that it would do the same for him too. Or what about the fact that he'll have the ability to turn invisible too? You know, thinking about it, secretly Oda is definitely plotting something, because we know Sanji wanted that invisibility fruit, which Absalom had, and now we find out that Shiryu has this fruit. And most of us predict that Shiryu will be Zoro's matchup. And so if we look at Sanji right now, who basically has Lunarian DNA, and Zoro who's fighting King, and King is a Lunarian, I think all the dots are connecting to something bigger. And honestly, I'm just really excited to see how Sanji grows, because it's going to be terrific. But that just about does it for me. I'm sure I'll go into some more details about Sanji's powers at a later point, once he does put on that raid suit. But for now, I'll leave it as it is. But let me know what you all think about Sanji's power up, and what you're looking forward to seeing. Please let me know down in the comments. And as usual, if you like anything I've had to say, then please make sure you leave a like on the video. And if you want to see more content like this, then make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss out when I drop more content just like this. Say